Hello and welcome. I am so excited to have you here as I share my new sewing tutorial. I've been really enjoying pinafores lately, which is an apron-like garment that you can use just like any other apron for cooking, baking, even gardening. I've also purchased quite a few of them on Etsy recently, so I thought it would be a good time to learn how to make my own. With that said, I've recently purchased the serger machine, which is something that I have wanted for so many years. So I finally decided to treat myself to it, and it's great for clothing garments just like this. So I won't delay any longer, we'll get right into the video. I hope that you guys are having a great holiday season, and let's get into this. Let me know if it's something that you end up trying, and thank you so much for being here.
So if you want to be awesome, keep watching and subscribe and hit that like button at the bottom, and I'll make more videos. Thanks.
This time of year can be a challenging one. The darkness visits us earlier with each passing day, and we must think of more things to do indoors. For some of us, that might mean finding ourselves in the kitchen. We can bake pies and cook comfort foods. So for this month, I wanted to make a pinafore that I could use while cooking in the autumn and winter, and to use while gardening in the spring and summer. I couldn't find a pattern that was similar to what I was going for, so I took some measurements and used an apron that I had for inspiration. I drew up a sketch to show you what my plans were. First, we'll want to cut out 3 panels for the skirt. Next, we'll want to cut out the 2 top panels that we'll be adding embroidery to. Then on to cutting 2 strips for the belt. We're going to also be adding buttons to the belt. Then you're going to want to cut 2 strips for the ties of the pinafore that we'll be folding in half to sew. And lastly, 2 strips for the straps that we will also be adding buttonholes to. I'm using linen fabric, which is one of my favorites, despite how easily it wrinkles. It's a strong fabric and it's moisture resistant, and honestly, I just love the way it looks. I purchased 2 yards at my local craft store. I started by laying out all of my fabric on the floor and made some measurements for the skirt panels. I then used my fabric ruler and a rotary cutter to cut off any of my mismeasured ends. When I finished the one side panel, I just used it as a template for the second panel. I traced it with my washable marker and then cut that out as well. The 2 panels that we need to cut for the top of the pinafore are a little trickier because you want the top of the panel to taper from 11 inches wide down to 12.5 inches wide at the bottom. I used a large piece of paper to sketch out my template so that I could use it to cut each piece exactly the same. I folded the paper in half as you saw so that I could get the same curve on each side. And as you can see here, it made it super easy to trace and cut out 2 of the top panels. And just a side note, you always want to pre-wash your fabric before you start all of this, as it can shrink after being washed and you don't want all of your hard work to go to waste. And the last pieces that we want to cut and measure are the strips for the belt, ties, and straps of the pinafore. So this is everything that we need after we made all of our cuts. Now on to the super fun part, designing the embroidery. I wanted to embroider a goat. They're one of my favorite animals, and to be honest, I find them rather creepy in a fun way, and I think it would look really cute on this pinafore. I sketched out my design on a piece of paper and then cut it out to make a template so that I could use it to trace onto my fabric using my water erasable marker. I swear I use this marker for every project. I picked it up at my local craft store and it makes my sewing projects so much easier. Once my goat was centered and traced onto the fabric, I started to add some details. I wanted to include a crescent moon, but I ended up opting out of that towards the end of the project. I'm no pro at embroidering, but that's how you get better at things. You just keep doing it. I placed my design into the embroidery hoop, picked out some of the colored threads that I wanted to use, and for the next few evenings, I listened to some true crime podcasts as I embroidered Mr. Goat to life. I really like to mix all of my favorite things into my projects, so basically anything that has to do with antiques, nature, or really anything spooky, as you guys all know. I was overall pretty happy with how he turned out. I did use some gray thread to outline his beard, and I think that's just what he needed. I also added some flowers underneath just to give it a little something extra. I find tutorials on embroidering everywhere from YouTube to Pinterest, and that's pretty much how I've taught myself. Once I was happy with how he looked, I took the embroidery hoop off and ran it under some cold water to get rid of the marker lines. Then I just laid it flat to dry for the night. Now we get to sew all of the pieces together. I started with the large panels for the skirt and pinned the right sides together. I then ran it through the sewing machine and then through the serger to give it a nice finish since I wouldn't be lining the pinafore. I just purchased the serger and I'm so excited to use it. I'm probably going to be making a bunch of these for Christmas gifts as well. A serger is also known as an overlock machine. It's great to use when sewing clothing as it trims excess seam allowances and it helps finish the edges to prevent any fraying of the fabric. I made 1-inch hems around the bottom and sides of the skirt and then ironed and pinned them into place. I also worked on mitered corners. This is where the fabric meets at a 45-degree angle to create a nice, professional finished look. As you can see here, you just want to measure double the hem length on each side, which would be 2 inches for this, and then just fold the fabric in half and sew. Then you're going to want to cut off any excess fabric from the corner that you just sewed and then flip it right side out. Once you've done both corners, you can now sew all the way around your hem to finish it off. And this is exactly what your hem should look like once it's complete, along with your corners. And as you can see here, we have the skirt done for now. On to sewing the straps and the ties. First thing would be to iron all 4 pieces in half and then sew along the entire length of each section, and also sew one end shut. The open end is where we'll be turning the fabric right side out. I tend to use a roller or one of my paintbrushes to help with this process, as you can see here. Then you'll want to lay everything flat to iron, and you can sew the other end shut. It doesn't matter how pretty those ends will look, as the tie ends will be hidden in the belt and the strap ends will be hidden in the top. It's now time to work on the buttonholes for the straps. I wanted to be able to adjust the length of my apron, so I'm going to be making 3 buttonholes. I measured 2 inches apart on the ends of each strap and marked with an X when I found where the center was and where I wanted each hole to start. Next, I changed out my presser foot to the one that is for buttonholes. I didn't even know that existed. This is my first time trying to sew them, so it was pretty exciting for me. There's actually a spot in the back of the presser foot that you'll want to set the button that you intend on using. This helps the machine know just how large to sew the hole. There's also a small lever that you're going to want to bring down to activate the button-making qualities of the machine. I really don't know how else to explain that part. But you're also going to want to make sure to set your machine to the buttonhole that you would like to create. There's usually a few options that you can choose from. And onward. I can't tell you just how happy this made me. I just lined up my needle with each X that I had measured and marked, and then sewed until the machine made a few beeps at me, indicating that it was done. Next, I took a straight pin and a seam ripper to open up the buttonholes. I used the pin to stop the seam ripper from going any further than I would have liked. Once all of my buttonholes are completed, we move on to sewing the top panel together. You want to place both right sides together, measure one last time, then pin and sew only down both sides. Once the sides are sewn, you'll want to insert your straps with the buttonholes, just as I'm showing here. Place them in between both top panels, then pin them into place and sew all along the top. Definitely take your time during this part and make sure that they're laying nice and flat. Once you stitch the straps into place along the top, everything really starts to come together. I then take my time and trim any loose threads and extra fabric, especially around the corners. This is going to help when we turn the top right side out to iron all the seams down. Now that I've ironed my top, I decided to add a border just to give it a little bit more character. I switched my thread to a lighter cream color and chose a fun stitch on my machine. I really feel like this is exactly what the top needed. You could also take some lace or hand stitch some designs as well. Be as creative as you like with this. Now back to the skirt. You'll want to run the top of the skirt, the side without the hem, through the machine with no back stitching, and you'll want the machine to be set so that the thread stitches are as long as the machine allows. This is going to give you a basting stitch. The basting stitch is going to allow you to pull on one of the threads on the side to gather the fabric so that we can add our belt and then bring the whole pinafore together. So now we're going to attach the belt. I actually found this to be the most frustrating part, I think, of the whole process, and I think that's just because I was pretty particular about the gathering. So I laid out both belt pieces on each side of the gathered top of the skirt, and I made sure that all of my gather was spaced out appropriately. Then I pinned my belt pieces into place, and finally carefully sewed it down. I carefully measured and marked where the middle of the pinafore will be and where the top section will be inserted into the belt. Then I started to fold a hem on the top section of the belt that hasn't been sewn yet. I pinned it into place and then ironed it down. When I got to the section of the top for the pinafore, I just inserted it and then pinned that into place as well. I am being very mindful that the back panel of the belt is also lining up with the front panel. I took my time to sew all of this into place, but we are almost done. You'll want to leave the ends of the belt open. Do not sew those shut yet, as that is where we'll be inserting our ties. You will want to fold the ends of the belt inwards to give it some nice edges and then slide in the ties. Pin that into place and then you can sew them shut. And you can see here how that's going to look. Now to add the buttons. I like to put the buttons on the inside of the pinafore. That way the additional fabric when I'm making the adjustments on the straps will be hidden on the inside, but either way would be acceptable. I added the buttons about 2 inches in from the ends of the belt sections. And now that we're finally done, let me show you our reveal.